All right, Dons, welcome to the lecture on 5.2. Today we're going to be talking about drafting the Constitution. So in 5.1, we went into some detail on the Articles of Confederation and the various problems with the Articles of Confederation. And as we'll find out in 5.2, after the colonists begin to realize all of these problems, there's a growing need, a growing clamor for a new type of government, and that would be the Constitution. So today we're going to understand the debates and compromises that took place at the Constitutional Convention. We're going to ask ourselves, what was the effect of Shays Rebellion, and what were the major conflicts at the Constitutional Convention, and why?
All right, so Shays Rebellion is a big deal, right? So Shays Rebellion comes to that issue of public debt we talked about at the end of 5.1, right? Where a lot of farmers had a lot of debts after the war. They were promised a lot of things backed by federal money or new national money that wasn't really worth anything, right? And the debt collectors were trying to collect debts basically by foreclosing on their farms and taking their farms. Daniel Shays was a farmer in western Massachusetts, was not very happy about this, and neither were many of his friends. They banded together. They ended up burning a courthouse in Springfield, Massachusetts. They burned all the records of all the debtors so that they couldn't collect on these Revolutionary War veterans. Right? But this underlines and shows that the American government and the state governments were not adequately protecting the rights and property of people, and they weren't able to react to these kind of major crises that were going to happen, right? So Shays Rebellion made a lot of people realize that the Articles of Confederation aren't working, and we're going to have to do something about it.
And in 1786, James Madison and a few other constitutional brainiacs met here in Maryland, in Annapolis, to discuss changes to the Constitution. And not enough men showed up. So they decided, you know what, we'll give it another year, go back and continue to study and come up with ideas for changes to the Articles of Confederation. And we'll meet again next year in Philadelphia in 1787. Well, in between those two meetings, Shays Rebellion happened, and that really scared the people because they realized, well, what if Daniel Shays' mob had actually succeeded? What if they had taken over Boston and Massachusetts? Who is there to stop them? No one. There's no one there because there's no army, because there's no government to collect taxes to pay an army. So they realized that, look, we need to change something here. And the important thing that you guys need to know is when they met in Philadelphia in the summer of 1787, most of the representatives and the founding fathers who met did not plan on coming up with a new government. They just wanted to change the Articles of Confederation. Many of them were happy with some of the things with the Articles. But men like James Madison came in determined to make huge changes, sweeping changes that would create a new government. And when given the opportunity to talk, he was able to convince many other founding fathers to jump on board with many of his ideas.
Right. Thomas Jefferson's not there. So as Thomas Jefferson, who's one of the better thinkers of the time, is actually serving as ambassador to France. So he wasn't showed up. Right. They actually locked all the windows and barred them all shut. So it's the middle of July in Philadelphia. It's hot. It's humid. They wanted to keep it so secret. They locked all the doors, locked all the windows, so that no one even walking by would be able to hear what they were talking about.
So, when they come together, you can imagine representatives from all over the colonies are going to have all kinds of different ideas on what will work and what won't work. Well, the central issues at the convention were, how can it strengthen the national government while preserving the rights of the states, right? So how do we find that balance? And that balance is known today as federalism. Something you'll learn about a lot more next year in government class. How can it balance conflicting interests of different groups within the society? Well, what they had is they had two different ideas. They had a big states idea and a small states idea. Basically, representation based on population, and that's the Virginia plan, or like the Articles of Confederation, the New Jersey plan was representation based on your state. So, of course, if you're a smaller state, you love the idea of representation based on state, because if you're Rhode Island, you have the same say in government as Virginia does, who has 15 times as many people as you do. So they had to come to a compromise, and that compromise is known as the Great Compromise.
I think it's also, remember, when we're talking about the different groups in society, you have to create a government, but America's a very diverse place. You have farmers, you have plantation owners, you have large cities, you have merchants, right? You have a lot of different people with a lot of very different ideas on what the government should do, right? So they need to be able to balance this so that everyone can have a way to prosper. The government can't benefit rural farmers. The government can't benefit city dwellers and merchants only, right? And it's all about trying to figure out this balance between bigger and smaller states.
Can you give me another pen? So one thing I want to point out here, and I'm struggling with quite a bit with these pens. There we go. We have the Virginia plan is the big states plan, and the New Jersey plan is the small states plan. Okay? So this one is... This one's based on population, and this one is based on equal representation. The compromise they come up with is the Great Compromise, which combines these two. And that will create the two houses of government we know today. And this is really important to know. And that is the House of Representatives, which is based on population, and the Senate. So they take these two ideas and they basically combine them to create what we have today. Now another issue which actually caused a lot of stress at the Constitutional Convention was slavery. What are we going to do about slavery? Are we going to get rid of it? Are we going to keep it? It sounds silly to us today, but many founding fathers thought that the idea of buying and selling people was really bad, but owning them, not so much. But because so many Southern representatives, especially from North and South Carolina, vehemently disagreed with any restrictions on slavery or the slave trade, the Continental Congress decided that they would, or Constitutional Congress decided that they would push it off for 20 years. So they said they'd ban the slave trade in 20 years, and they would keep slavery.
Another thing that they did was representation, right? Because you have a house based on population. Southern states have all of these slaves, right? And whether those slaves who don't vote or don't really have any rights count as citizens towards their population. Southern states thought that they should. They think they should get extra slaves, extra seats in Congress because of their slave population. Northern states thought it was ridiculous. I think one delegate from Massachusetts even said if slaves should count, his cows should count, because the way this
property,
the Southerners would talk about slavery is they would talk about it as their property, right? So what they end up coming with is a 3/5 compromise, right, where 3/5 of the slaves' population of a state is going to be counted towards their electoral representation, right? And this is actually going to be very important. It's going to give the South an unnecessary and unwarranted extra seats in the House, right? So actually being from a Southern state is going to give you more representation because of these extra 10 or 15, depending on the time period, congressmen the Southern states would have.
And what they were giving up is they also had to pay 3/5 of the taxes for each person. So they were giving up a little bit, but that representation in Congress, that's priceless. You can't put a price tag on that because that can dictate legislation in the future, which will help make them money.
And we'll see. I mean, the biggest slave state is Virginia, and it has a lock on the presidency for much of...
Yeah, for the first 5 presidents.
Yep. Came from Virginia.
So what they came up with is they came up with the Constitution, and it took a lot of debate, but the Constitution is the most successful government in modern world history, so obviously it worked. And one of the major reasons is the division of powers, right? Federalism, which I talked about earlier. And what federalism really is that the federal government has very specific powers, and the state governments have very specific powers. And you can't take them away from each other. They work together with each other. In government, we say, it's like a marble cake, where the federal powers and the state powers sort of blend in with each other.
Right. Well, the other thing, not to get confused, the division of powers is separation of powers, right? So government you have to make the laws, you have to enforce the laws, right? And you have to interpret the laws, right? And normally, before that was just the king. The king would do all those things. That was the government, right? So we've split up power 3 ways, right? So we have a legislative branch, the Congress and Senate that makes the laws. We have a president that enforces the law, and we have a national judiciary that kind of interprets the laws, the Constitution, the laws, things like that, right? So we split power up so that there's 3 equal branches of government that all are able to check each other in the balance of power, right? So the court can strike down an act of Congress, the president can veto something that Congress does. There's lots of different things that each branch can do to each other to kind of limit their power.
And one thing that's really interesting, right, we have to keep in mind heading into the Constitutional Convention is that they were afraid of the federal government having too much power. Everyone was so afraid of the federal government having too much power. And when James Madison and some of his other founding fathers who were in favor of a constitution wrote this, people complained to him saying, well, where is it in the Constitution that details all the rights we have that the federal government can't take away? Where is that? And James Madison said, well, the federal government only has the rights that we actually gave it. All the other rights are reserved to the people or reserved to the states. And in order to get many anti-federalists, many people who were afraid of this big government, to sign the Constitution, they had to add amendments. And the first 10 amendments added the first few years after the writing of the Constitution are known as the Bill of Rights. They specifically said, right, you have the right to freedom of religion, you have the right to freedom of speech, you have the right to avoid cruel and unusual punishment, you have the right to a trial by jury. So they wanted to make sure we are going to write down specifically the things that this federal government can never ever take from us. And not only that, but if we want to make changes to the Constitution, we can keep adding amendments. Therefore, it's a living document, a document that changes with the society. And there are 27 amendments total so far.
All right. That's it, guys. Thanks for watching. Keep on the lookout for section 5.3.
Yep.
All right.